In Washington, all of us have met with the advocacy groups, with administrators, law enforcement, and a variety of different stakeholders, and we have listened. Today's bill is much stronger for it. We have improved it. We have made changes based on suggestions that we have heard. And most importantly, we have renewed our determination to make this a bipartisan effort in an environment where there is all kinds of winds that are pushing against efforts like these. I want to turn over the podium because, as you can see, we have a lot of people who want to weigh in, but I do want to give a special welcome to Annie Clark, Annie Clark, and Andrea Pino, who are survivors from the University of North Carolina, and they are featured in a powerful documentary that will open this weekend, The Hunting Ground. We had an opportunity to see it last night at the White House, and I am hopeful that many Americans will avail themselves of the opportunity because I think it reveals in a way that is so basic why this legislation is so important. I want to thank all my colleagues, and now I will turn the podium over to the lead co-sponsor on behalf of the Republicans and the majority in the Senate, and that is Senator Dean Heller.
Claire, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. What a pleasure it is to be here together again with this group, bipartisan senators that are working together on a topic that I believe is near and dear to all of us. Incredibly important, and I want to thank them for their time, their effort, for all of you to be here today. I want to thank Annie and Andrea for their strength, for sharing us their message, for the documentary that will go across this country that I believe will send the right message to the right people, to the right universities, to law enforcement, everybody to know that this is an issue that we all care about and we care about deeply. And the reason I'm here, and I've said this and I'll say it again, is that first and foremost, I'm a father. And I'm like a father everywhere across this country. Every father cares about this particular issue, especially if you have daughters and you're sending them to school. I also happen to be everybody's grandfather. I have a granddaughter, and the key for me in this issue is this is something that she will never have to deal with. Never have to deal with. Not my daughters, not my granddaughters, not your daughters, not your granddaughters. We want to make sure that we can make these campuses a safer place. I met with Senator Alexander, chairman of the Senate Help Committee. Pleased that he is eager to move forward with this piece of legislation, take a look at it, work with us, and it'll take the combined work of all of us to put together this piece of legislation that will protect our students when they go to school. So thank you very much for being here, and it's great to be part of this coalition. Thank you. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Senator Heller, and thank you for your leadership and stepping forward along with this really great group of people. The first question I'm sure on everyone's minds is, will it be passed? And the answer is absolutely yes. This measure will be passed by the Congress because of the men and women before you now, others of our colleagues who know the time has come for the Congress to act, and countless survivors and victims who have stepped forward with the courage and strength that inspires us to be here today. We have listened, and this legislation is better for our listening to them, to advocates, to college officials, and to parents, and I'm one of them, who are alarmed, and rightly so, that the crime of campus sexual assault is staggeringly prevalent and stunningly underreported. Now, it's true that the vast majority of these crimes are committed by a small fraction of students. But everyone has to be engaged and committed to end it. Everyone should be involved in intervening and acting when they see something like this crime happening. And because it's a crime, victims and survivors should have access to the criminal justice process, but also to a fair and uniform internal disciplinary process. And one of the new sections of this bill provides more training and services with federal funds so that those best practices and training and services for victims and survivors can be provided, along with confidential advice and accountability, real accountability, through an anonymous survey conducted periodically that will disclose whether or not progress is being made. The goal is a standard of conduct and a culture of safety that ought to be insisted on by every parent when they drop their kids off at school, as I have done, and ought to be the new norm on college campuses. Let me say finally, colleges and universities are beginning to get it. They're taking some steps in the right direction. There have been some reforms, but there is so much work still to be done in assuring the process due to all sides, and most especially to folks whose lives have been torn apart by this heinous crime. I want to introduce someone who has been with us from the beginning, Senator Rubio of Florida.
Well, I too am grateful for the opportunity to be a part of this such an important issue. You know, in the 21st century, we're going to ask all of our young people to seek higher education of some form or fashion. It's very difficult to find a good paying job in the new century without skill acquisition. And it's important that as we ask and encourage people to seek higher education, that we also provide them with the safest, most responsible environment possible to learn. And that's what this bill endeavors to do, is to provide the utmost possible in terms of security and safety, but also reliability in the processes if, God forbid, someone encounters this heinous crime and becomes a victim. We want survivors of this process to be able to avail themselves of the processes that exist that protect them and make them confident in coming forward as opposed to keeping it to themselves. And by the way, this is not something we pursue in an adversarial way against institutions of higher learning. In fact, we've engaged the institutions in Florida, our colleges and universities, in this process because we want their input. This doesn't work without them. But I'm glad that we were able to come together at a time when so much of the attention in Washington is about the things we cannot do. I hope that on this important issue that affects all Americans and anyone who has young people that they love who are attending higher education, I hope this stands as an example of what we are able to do. Y brevemente en español lo que quiero decir es que estoy muy agradecido por la oportunidad de ser parte de este esfuerzo. Es un tema de suma importancia en este país. En este nuevo siglo, para poder tener un trabajo mejor, hay que recibir educación avanzada y tenemos una obligación de asegurar que nuestros jóvenes, cuando van a estudiar en universidades y en colegios, van a tener la protección de la ley en contra de este tipo de ataque y contra este tipo de crimen. Así que le agradezco mucho a mis colegas por ser parte de este esfuerzo y pienso que en una era en que todas las noticias sobre las cosas que no podemos lograr aquí en Washington, tenemos la oportunidad de lograr algo positivo para el país y especialmente para nuestros jóvenes. And now let me present my colleague, someone who also is deeply committed to this and has worked with me and worked alongside him on other higher education issues of importance, Mark Warner of Virginia.
Gracias, Marco, por su ayuda.
Todos estamos de acuerdo.
Let me say, first of all, thanks particularly to Senator McCaskill and Senator Gillibrand, Senator Heller, who've kind of brought this group together. 10 senators, 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans. That is a great starting point. We had a lot of other co-sponsors that were together with us last session. This, echoing what Dick Blumenthal said, we're going to get this passed this year. Let me state, as the senator from Virginia, I want to start off by saying, as we move towards a solution at the federal level, I've been extraordinarily disappointed by the fact that some shoddy journalism at Virginia's top-ranked flagship institution have led some to question these efforts. Now, while the discredited Rolling Stone article was unfortunate, it did spark a conversation across all of the Commonwealth. We've had input from virtually every university, public and private, across Virginia, and it has spurred action. But let me be clear, the problem of campus sexual assault is not the domain of any single university, any single region, any single state. It is unfortunately a problem that takes place all across our nation. It's time that we empower students and that we cut down on this culture of both burying these stories or not having the kind of processes in place so that victims can get their due rights. This bill, by setting transparency, by setting a baseline, by trying to look at prevention, some of the additions that we've made to this legislation since last year, takes us dramatically forward. Others have made their comments as well. I've been a governor that's appointed folks as college board trustees. I've been a college board trustee myself. I know this is going to be a challenge for many colleges and universities to work through. But I'm also the father of 3 college-age daughters. And this is an issue that we owe not only our kids, but as Marco mentioned earlier, for everyone going forward with higher education, you've got to be able to go to college with a sense that we're going to make it as safe a place as possible for students in a culture that supports them through all their challenges. Let me bring forward now someone who's been with us as well from the beginning of this whole effort, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, the senior senator from Iowa, Chuck Grassley.
Like everybody else, I associate myself with all the thanks for the leaders in this area, the prime sponsors of this bill. It's this simple. Sexual assault is a crime, and it too often hasn't been treated that way. Sometimes, as you know, the victim is treated worse than the criminal. Campus proceedings designed for plagiarism or for fraternity pranks are not adequate in addressing this crime of sexual assault. This can result in one of the most heinous crimes possible being swept under the rug. So justice is not served. This bill makes the entire process sensitive to the victim's wishes so more victims will come forward. Our bill has provisions to ensure that colleges treat sexual assault with the really seriousness that it deserves. This includes better coordination with law enforcement, clearer expectations for how colleges should handle reports of sexual assault. Sexual assault is not some mere code of conduct violation. It's a major criminal offense. Like with any crime, weak enforcement makes the problem worse. This bill will turn that around. Thank you. Oh, I'm supposed to call on my friend Senator Ayotte.
I want to thank Senator Grassley, and it really, I think it shows the strong support we have for this bill to have the chairman of the Judiciary Committee with us on this bill. And I want to very much thank Annie and Andrea because their courage, their commitment as survivors, and really their advice to make sure that we understand what the focus is here at the end of the day. And that focus is a safe environment for every student on campus, no matter where you choose to pursue higher education. And every victim deserves the support and services and understanding that there's a fair, thorough process on campus, that these crimes are going to be fully investigated, that it doesn't matter what university you go to, what college you go to, that there'll be consistent procedures across our higher education institutions, because right now, unfortunately, there's been a patchwork system out there, and there's been a real inconsistency depending on where you go to school. If you unfortunately find yourself as a victim, what you're going to receive and how you will be treated. And we want to end that and make sure that every campus is safe. I've had, since the original bill got introduced, like many of my colleagues, as Senator McCaskill had said, I've had the chance to visit some of our colleges and universities in New Hampshire, including the University of New Hampshire, Dartmouth, St. Anselm's College, to talk to students and to talk to campus administrators, law enforcement, to get feedback about the bill. And I believe this bill is even stronger than the original bill that we introduced, and you see even more support now for getting this passed. So I look forward to working with my colleagues and making sure that we get this done in this Congress, because this is important for every parent and every student in America. And I'm honored to introduce Senator Gary Peters from Michigan, and we're so glad to have his support on this bill.
Well, thank you. And first off, I just want to thank Senator McCaskill and Senator Gillibrand for your leadership in this bill and bringing us all together, and the other co-sponsors today. You know, this is a time when most of the stories that are reported out of Congress is the divisions, the partisanship. But here's a prime example where people are coming together from both parties in a very strong way to stand up for an issue that every parent fears. You know, and right now, over 600,000 students in Michigan are going to higher education. And this is very personal to me, as you've heard from some of the other speakers. It's personal because I have a daughter in one of those institutions. My daughter is a college sophomore. I have a high school student who is now looking at colleges, and she will also be there. And as my two daughters go there, as every parent is concerned about their safety when they go there, they want to know that they have a safe, nurturing environment when they're in that institution of higher learning. But it doesn't happen, unfortunately, to too many universities. In fact, just the numbers of thousands of women who have been victimized by this heinous crime, and it has been underreported. And what the statistic that probably is most disturbing to me is that if you look at the actual investigations that have gone on college campuses, and this is something we know impacts every single campus, no matter where you are in the country, and yet over the last 5 years, 40% of institutions have not had one investigation on their campus. How can that be? How can we have institutions that have not had one investigation on their campus when we know this is a crime that occurs in every single campus? So this bill is a step forward to bring victims who often suffer in the shadows and do not know where to turn, that we can bring those victims out of the shadows to know that this country cares and that those universities are standing up for their students. So I'm proud to be a part of it, and I look forward to passing this bill in a broad bipartisan support. It's supported not only in a bipartisan way here in Congress, by parents all across this country. And now I'd like to introduce my colleague in the freshman class and a friend of mine from the House, Senator Shelley Capito.
Thank you, Gary. And I want to thank all of you, and I want to thank all my colleagues for allowing the two freshmen to join in what we think is a great effort. I was on this bill when it was in the House 2 years ago. I deeply believe in the improvements that have been made and the way it's been refined. So I do believe, as been said before, we can get this passed and we will get this passed. As we've said, no student should live on a college campus, should live in fear of being attacked. We must say no more. A no more to the sexual assault or the culture of silence that's been alluded to. Current federal law sort of had the perverse effect of encouraging colleges to underreport sexual assaults. And this bipartisan legislation will protect students and professionalize the response and reporting. Again, I'm a mother of a daughter. I have a granddaughter as well. But I also have two sons. And I think by making campus safer for our daughters in making sure that we have a system to report and to deal with the devastating issue of sexual assault, and mostly this is for females, it's going to help the males as well, because a safe campus all across the way is good for both males and females. But I would like to say, earlier this month, our flagship university, West Virginia University, launched an intensive campaign called It's On Us to prevent sexual assault and charge campus culture with taking care of themselves. In other words, buy-in from the students, the faculty, and the surrounding community. Because you can pass all the laws you want, but if the ones that are most deeply affected don't have the buy-in and that campus culture from the students doesn't exist, it makes it just a little bit more overwhelming. When I was in school, I worked at a rape crisis center. I never imagined that with what I saw occurring at that time on my college campus, we would still not have addressed the effects. So today, I'm very pleased to be here. I'm proud to join on this, and I'm very proud to introduce primary sponsor, Senator Gillibrand from New York, my friend, my pitcher. And so anyway, that's the softball team joke. In any event, thank you.
Familiar as a house in softball. So Shelley has an excellent arm. She's our third baseman. So it is a real privilege to be here. I want to thank Claire McCaskill for her laser-like focus on this issue, doing the first survey, really focusing her efforts around her state and around the country. I want to thank the others who worked very hard to help draft this bill. Richard Blumenthal and Dean Heller and Chuck Grassley really focused on some of the early drafting that I was very grateful for, along with every senator standing here. Every single person added to this new revised bill to make it stronger. I also want to offer my gratitude to the survivors and the advocates. all who have publicly shared the worst moments of their life so that peers would never have to go through what they've gone through. Some of you will see The Hunting Ground tonight, as Claire mentioned. This is a powerful film. It includes the story of Annie Clark and Andrea Pino. They have founded a not-for-profit called End Rape on Campus. They are going to take this call to action, campus to campus, all across this country, and you'll hear their story in that film. I first met Annie and Andrea about a year ago when they knocked on my office door, didn't have a meeting, but said, "We need to see the senator." Sure enough, I sat down with them, and I cannot tell you how inspiring these two young women are. They are so courageous, as are their peers who have been leading this movement. They're inspiring to me. They're inspiring to other young men and women across the country, and this is their movement. These senators standing with me here today listened to their stories and are fighting on their behalf. I am very optimistic. As Senator Blumenthal said, we will pass this bill. Last July, we stood here, outlined our first draft, our path forward to protect students. Despite having a legal obligation to guarantee a safe learning environment, colleges and universities have consistently underplayed and underreported campus sexual violence, fearful that their application numbers will simply go down if these incidents become public. We listened to the survivors who spoke not only of the physical assault they endured, but the second injustice, the second betrayal of trust by schools they love. And so we introduced the Campus Accountability Safety Act to basically flip the incentives so that schools, for the first time, it is in their best interest to actually solve the problem and to do it aggressively. Today, we're bringing the bill forward because the price of a college education should never be the risk of being sexually assaulted. With the additional input that everyone's discussed here today, we think this bill is stronger than ever, and we believe that as it stands today, the reason why schools are failing is they do not take this crime seriously. They do not take it for the violent crime that it is. Schools all across the country will be happy to withhold your diploma if you didn't pay your fees. They'll be happy to kick you out of school if you cheated on a test. But the statistics for students who have violated other students, who have sexually assaulted them and raped them, only 1 in a third is actually expelled for that crime. In other words, 2/3 of students who are found responsible for sexual assault are still on their college campuses. What does it say about these school priorities if some colleges have a tougher justice system for a student cheating on an exam than for someone who has raped another student? The Campus Accountability Safety Act will transform the way colleges and universities deal with this crime. This bill, instead of pretending these crimes don't happen, would make sure schools are held accountable for not reporting the actual crimes, the statistics, accurately and publicly. And instead of worrying about a drop-off in applications for those numbers, schools will be considered outliers, that their numbers are lower than what other students are actually saying is happening on that campus. That's why these confidential surveys are so important. With this bill, instead of treating accusers and accused with unequal standards, the accusers and accused would have the same access to all due process rights. Instead of survivors feeling pressured to report before they are emotionally ready, survivors will now be able to wait until they transfer or graduate before the statute of limitation clock starts ticking. And instead of the survivor feeling like she has to go public with the details of the rape just to capture her school's attention, she would now have a dignified path towards justice without having to broadcast the worst details of her life to the public on the cover of the New York Times. I urge everyone here to keep fighting for the safety and accountability on our college campuses. I know we will pass this bill. I'd now like to introduce our champions, Annie Clark and Andrea Pino, the founders of End Rape on Campus.
Hi, thank you all so much for being here today. 7 years ago, when I was a student, I tried to seek resources at my university, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And when I had told an employee about my experience, she blamed me and asked me what I would have done differently in that situation. About 2.5 years ago, another UNC student, Andrea Pino, reached out to me and told me her story of rape and subsequent mistreatment by the university. Her story eerily resembled my own. But we soon realized that we were not alone in our experiences, and students around the country were not receiving the safe and equitable education promised by glossy brochures and federal law. So along with other survivors, we spoke out and gave Jane Doe a face. But while we need culture change, we also need legislation that flips the incentives so survivors are no longer seen as PR crises to be managed. Currently, it is more likely for a survivor to drop out of school than it is for a rapist to be expelled. That is unacceptable. And though healing from trauma is different and it's a nonlinear process, this process should not include reliving our personal rape stories in the press to shame our colleges into complying with the law. So I thank all of the senators standing here today for your support. We hope that this bill will pass. I think it will pass because campus violence does not have a political party. And we need this bill because our students deserve better than the current status quo, where 20 to 25% of our female students will graduate with a second degree, a degree entitled Rape Survivor. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce Andrea Pino.
Thank you, Senators Gillibrand, McCaskill, and other brave colleagues here standing beside us. I've been lucky enough to have the opportunity to work closely with Senator Gillibrand's office in drafting of this bill ever since Annie and I walked into the Senator's office without an appointment. The CASA Act is a culmination of our efforts as survivors and symbolizes an opportunity for Congress to finally step up to the plate. Every school in each of the 50 states is plagued with sexual violence, and it is the responsibility of our elected officials to address these concerns. It is rare to see a bipartisan coalition in Congress these days, and this should send a clear message to everyone in this country that sexual violence is not a partisan issue. It is an American issue. It's time. It's time for our students to be students again, without the challenge of single-handedly holding their schools accountable, and without the fear of sharing a degree with their rapist. The time to fight is now. Please stand with us.
Oh, and now we'd like to introduce Scott Berkowitz from RAIN.
Great. Good. Thanks, Annie and Andrea. Unfortunately, this is a story that we hear every day. More than 400 people a day call the National Sexual Assault Hotline, 3/4 of whom are college age or younger. And almost to a person, we hear stories of how the system failed them. So we need this bill. We need to pass it soon. The good news is I think that I'm really optimistic that the country's ready for this. I think we're seeing overwhelming support from the public. Polls say that the public is ready for congressional action. We've got a great group of Senate leaders here who've worked very closely together, as well as gotten lots of input from survivors and others, and created a really strong bill that I think is going to help make a big difference. I think if we can pass this, and if we can create a system that more survivors think they have a chance at justice and are willing to come forward and report, I think we can really finally put an end to this problem. Thanks.
Any questions? Any questions on topic?
Senator McCaskill, as you know, the film that you viewed last night features an allegation against the person who's likely to be the #1 or 2 draft choice in the NFL this year. What does that say to you about how this issue is being taken, A, inside the NFL itself, but also just in general in sort of culture?
I think it's very important that any team that is thinking about drafting Jameis Winston watch this movie before they draft him.
Any other questions on topic?
I can talk about some. Go ahead.
Well, I'll do a couple, and then we can all do a couple. One of them is something that I think is important for us to emphasize. We are very focused on making sure there's also due process. So the notice to both the student who has complained under Title IX and to the student who has been accused under Title IX. They will both receive notice about the investigation proceeding. That will be transparent, and that's something that hasn't always been the case. So, and both of them will have the right to have assistance as they go forward, representing themselves in front of the Title IX adjudication on campuses. The other thing we've done is, I'll let Kirsten talk about the grant program or Dean, either one, but we have changed where the fine money goes, rather than it going back towards enforcement, which could create an incentive for maybe unfair enforcement. The money will now go into a grant program, which I'm happy to let one of my colleagues explain.
The other, is there any
go ahead.
change you want to talk about? The other couple of changes, which I think are really important, is stronger standards for the climate survey, which having a survey every 2 years that is confidential, that has certain standards, that is administered by the Department of Education is vital, because that's what creates transparency and accountability. The second change, the third change, is that it clarifies the MOU with law enforcement to guard against unintended consequences of agencies non-relevant to prosecuting or investigating sexual assault. It makes it very clear who the MOU has to be with, so there's no concern there. And then the last thing it does is strengthen the role of the confidential advisor to make it very clear who the confidential advisor is, what type of information he or she will be required to provide to anyone, and it broadens the number of university employees who be required to complete the minimum training requirements. So again, the people who are involved in these issues know how to ask the questions, when to ask the questions, and not create the victim blaming that we see so often on these campuses.
Yeah, and if I can say something briefly, in my conversation with the senator chairs the HELP committee, Senator Alexander wants to put this through the process, through the questioning and through the whole process that we have here in Washington, D.C., which goes to show us that this may not be the perfect piece of legislation that he may agree to. But I said, with these advocates here and with the bipartisan group that we have here today, we're going to push this piece of legislation, but keep in mind that this has to go through the committee. Senator Alexander is very interested in moving this piece of legislation forward, but at the end of the day, it may look a little bit different than what we have. But we're going to certainly push hard, work hard together as a coalition to make sure that this is the strongest piece of legislation that we can bring before the American people.
And we have a list of all the changes, Chuck, and John can get that to you.
And I might just add, the changes were the result of more listening. The grant program that has been included has been used in various campuses of our states. Connecticut College, for example, was the model for using the best practices and funding mechanisms, and also services to the victims and survivors. So this is a learning process. We're listening through roundtables that we've had in our states and down here in Washington, and it will be a continuing process.
Senator McCaskill, you mentioned earlier sort of the winds of opposition to this, and I'm wondering, early on, as you know, university presidents were among those winds. And as you've done your outreach, all of you senators, have you noticed any changes in their sort of response to the last 6 or 8 months?
I think they have been reassured that we wanted to listen and hear their practical input as to how we can make this bill more workable. I've not met a university president who doesn't agree with this goal, and I've not met one that hasn't acknowledged the mistakes of the past. I really do believe they are fully aware how they have failed the Annies and the Dreas of the world. And I think they are, and if any of them think that the winds of opposition will be enough to slow us down, I think they're sadly mistaken.
But I think that's really a critical question, because as I alluded to in my remarks, we should give colleges and universities due credit, because they have been responding, maybe too late, in some cases too little, but they've been listening to us, to survivors, in the roundtables we've held, in other kinds of meetings. There have been changes, and that's a good sign, and also a sign that they'll be supportive.
Even in my state, our SUNY system, State University of New York, has already endorsed the provisions of this bill, and that's a state system of 500,000 students. It's the largest in the country. Also, some of the changes we put in were because schools needed to clarify certain things so they knew what to do. So the reason why our MOU is clarified is because they wanted to make sure they knew who the MOU was going to be with. And also, the role of confidential advisor was clarified because they wanted to make sure they had the right person, and that person could actually take this information and keep it confidential, that it could actually have a privilege associated with it. So through these conversations, this bill is a better bill. It's just a stronger, better bill, more refined, more specific, and more collaborative with the survivor community, with the accused community, with the universities, and with law enforcement. So it's a better bill, and it's got a real strength to it. No, the bill actually has clarified rights for the accused. Right now, the process that is going on college campuses serves no one. It doesn't serve the survivor. It doesn't serve the accused. And because there's such a lack of training, a lack of clarity, and a lack of due process, it's a broken system. And so what this bill does is actually fix a lot of the problems that do a disservice both to victims and to those who are accused. Thank you.